we're going to wait for a minute for people to show up. But I'm Ulrich Baer. I'm the director of the Center for the Humanities at NYU, New York University, and I want to thank everybody for showing up tonight, or for those of you who are watching this as a recording. And I want to thank our guests who are friends and colleagues. I'm really pleased and excited. And I'll introduce you briefly. And today's session is about collaborative writing and what motivated you to work together. You'll talk a bit about you've worked together for quite a long time, and maybe you can tell us about the current project you're involved with. And the point of these sessions on writing matters is to be quite concrete after laying out the scope of your intellectual argument, what you want to do, to tell us some of the tips and tricks. You're both so widely published in so many areas that some of our audience are probably younger scholars, some are more experienced or seasoned. There's a range of people always, and we just love to hear how you make it work. So Faye Ginsburg, Faye, you have to raise your hand so people who don't know you, we know who you are. Thank you, Professor of Anthropology, and you're the director of the Center for Media, Culture, and History at NYU, and the co-director of the Center for Disability Studies, the author of the forthcoming Disability, Personhood, and the New Normal in 21st Century America, and also the author of Mediating Culture, Indigenous Identity in a Digital Age. So your work covers a range of topics, and you are the co-editor of several books and works that maybe you want to reference and talk about yourself, and your work covers such a wide range of interests. Rayna, Rapp, also professor of anthropology. Hi, Rayna, thank you for being here. Recipient of many awards, including Guggenheim and other grants, and you have so many articles, published papers, book chapters, and other materials on topics including gender, reproduction, health, culture, science, and technology. Many of them co-authored, many of them in academic journals, others in more popularly accessible journals. So you have done a range of writing, both of you, and both of you are really also not just scholars, if that was not enough, and teachers, but also in your own right activists for a different and new understanding of disability. And tomorrow is United Nations Day for People with Disabilities on December 3rd. This is recorded the day before. So we also want to recognize that. And I just want to actually thank you for really shifting the way we think about some of these topics in the academy and outside. And then if you just want to go right in, Faye and Rayna, and maybe start us out really briefly talking about the project you're engaged with right now.
Okay, so we have a long history together. We have been writing together for over 30 years, which means we started when we were 10.
She started when she was 10, I'm older.
Yeah, when she was 15. So so in the present, we are currently, actually, hopefully next semester when we're both not teaching, please, inshallah, please God, whatever, Baruch Hashem, we're going to finish a book, long outstanding, that had the title you said, although it's probably going to change because the new normal now covers everything, but basically based on long-term ethnographic research. It's, let's call it Disability Worlds. We're working on the title. But anyway, we need to update it because things are so fast moving in this, in good ways in this area. But I'm going to go back and start at the beginning. We just went over that this afternoon to try and remember. I first met Rayna when I was in grad school at the at CUNY in the anthropology department, getting my degree. And I originally wanted to study camel nomads. And then I heard Rayna talk at the Graduate Center, and I thought, maybe I could do something different. And it was also right after Ronald Reagan was elected, so it has, in a certain way, resonance with the present. And I thought, I think the camels will wait, and I need to do something a bit more engaged with things that we're very concerned about. Rayna, of course, presented there about both her work in France, but also Rayna is very well known for launching feminist anthropology and the study of reproduction and putting reproduction at the center of research and bringing women's lives back into prominence as you know, in a field that, of course, like many other fields, has long been male dominated, despite Margaret Mead and that legacy. In any case, So being the moment that it was, I decided I wanted to understand who women were in the Right to Life movement, and that became my dissertation. And because there was no one at the grad center who could really supervise that properly, Rayna became an outside reader and very influential person on my dissertation. So that relationship goes way back. And it was, again, about the politics of reproduction, which has been a longstanding interest of both of ours and has been the source of our writing together, thinking together, and being activists together. So that was quite a while ago. That was like 1986. Since then, we've written over 30 articles. We've edited a book together. We've run 2 major international conferences. We've edited a special issue of the flagship journal, Current Anthropology. And as I mentioned, we're continuing our work together, trying to complete this book. And we have been active starting the Center for Disability Studies at NYU and bringing that work to the broader campus and the many people who can attend our virtual events since we've gone virtual. So that's kind of the origin story. Rayna, I think I'm going to toss it over to you because there's
I would just say that Faye, you gave me too much credit because the two of us started using the line that you just attributed to me, which was about dragging reproduction to the center of social theory. From the time that Faye and I started talking, and I had the great good luck to be a member of your dissertation committee, we kind of never stopped talking. And we just kind of melded our, now you'd say in the language of the young folks these days, it's a kind of a mind meld in which at a certain point, we stopped knowing whose idea was whose because they were so much part of an ongoing and very, very layered conversation. I was, when, as Faye was alluding to, I was working on reproduction and gender in anthropology as part of that generation that kind of launched women's studies, which became gender studies, which became sexuality and gender studies, which became LGBTQ, questioning everything studies. The evolution of all those things was going on. And it was extremely important to me as somebody in the field of anthropology that our field take into account what had been missing about all those topics, many of which were just kind of shoved to one side as normative. Oh, we know what reproduction is, we know what kinship is, we know what families are. But in fact, if you don't ask most of the practitioners what they're practicing, you know very little except the enunciated norms. So we were all involved in trying to make those more empirical questions. And I set off on a study of what was then a new reproductive technology, amniocentesis, the early genetic testing that went for a direct diagnosis by taking some amniotic fluid out of the uterus of the pregnant woman. And from that, you could read something about the genes, the chromosomes, the genes. Later on, it would become a much more elaborate set of technologies. I'm still kind of on that trail, but in the process, I was recruiting pregnant women all over the place to be part of telling a multi-racial, ethnic, religious, national class background story about what women did and didn't understand about a new scientific test, which promised progress, but actually put them in a kind of gatekeeping position of having to decide who would enter the human community and their family and who would not. So that whole set of questions was very preoccupying to me. Long story short, Fred, Faye's husband, was off doing fieldwork in Australia, and I went to her amniocentesis with her. And indeed, she became a voice in my book on amniocentesis, testing women, testing the fetus, and very carefully at all of the presentations I give and the publications I would do off of it, I would of course mask my informants, which was the IRB appreciated way to do things in those days and now. And if Faye was in the audience, she would immediately unmask herself and say, that was me speaking, and talk about her own experiences. Because of course, Faye and Fred's daughter was born with a very rare Jewish genetic disease. And on the basis of that, our work, Faye's on abortion, politics, and reproduction, mine on reproduction and technology, hers and Fred's on the experience of raising a kid who had a very, very rare and unknown disability. And then my sort of being a sympathetic family friend and observer, tagging along on that journey, we started working on the way in which what we used to call there was siloing between the things we knew about reproduction and kinship and family and the things we knew about disability, and how those two arenas of knowledge were kept very distinct, and we needed to put them together. And we figured out that this thing we were looking at, this problem of the shifting public knowledge about disability and why so few people who were sent for reproductive genetic testing or who even thought about family making ever really considered disability as a family issue, we started to understand that the social landscape had profoundly changed, whether it was through legislation, first the IDEA, Individuals with Disability Education Act for Children, and later the ADA in 1990, the civil rights legislation, the Americans with Disability Act, that a whole legal, medical, public, cultural landscape was in formation, and yet what we didn't know was how people actually accessed it, what they experienced about it, whose stories counted in the making of that world. And we decided that first we needed to actually do some empirical research as field working anthropologists. And so, as Faye said, we did a huge amount of writing, much of it theoretical, Faye bringing her media savvy and me bringing my sort of medical anthropology chops together to try to tell that story of what reproduction and disability had to do together. But starting after early publications in 2001, 2001, 2002, and around there, we also said, gee, we need to find out empirically what this is about. And we went out and were fortunate to receive grants, bunch of different grants at different times that enabled us to start talking in the way anthropologists do with families who were then raising kids with disabilities, often in the public school system, often trying to deal with both the nightmare bureaucracy, but also the enormous amount of social prejudice and invisibilization and exclusion that those families experience. So that became part of the process. And then we grew up with that project because we discovered that over time, while much of the early activism that we wrote about had to do with parents of children with disability, those children grow up and they become adults with disabilities, many of whom become activists in their own right. And so we started following the leadership of many, many projects in public culture, in the arts, in education, in science, you name it, everywhere, where people with disabilities themselves kind of drew through the red thread of what it would take to really make equality a possibility, what kind of disability justice would be served by transforming the way that their activism and their life experiences were understood to be expertise, not just stigma.
Rayna, can I go back to one thing, this genealogy, which is really important for what we want to look at. Before the mind meld that you actually sort of complemented together, you said Faye brought a particular kind of strength or perspective or set of training and skills, and you brought another one. Before you became so close that you sort of were able to, did you think this was one of the reasons why you felt writing together rather than continuing to publish in your separate areas or distinct areas was necessary because the field was not working otherwise, because you needed those two perspectives?
I'm going to jump in and take us back, Rayna, because you went way ahead of genealogy, because we actually wrote a major review essay called The Politics of Reproduction in 1992. And that's how that was actually our first piece that we genuinely sat down and wrote from scratch together for, their big annual review essays in every field. And so that was one of ours. And then did a big international conference with the Leonard Wren Foundation. And we did come at it from different directions. I was always much more engaged with I would say more engaged with the politics, but my interest was the politics as it played out on the national stage with the huge conflicts around reproduction, while Rayna was looking much more at the politics of genetic testing, reproductive choice, and these began. They all, one of the intersecting pieces of that has always been disability around those questions of right to life, of fetal selection, and all that kind of stuff. So we brought different things, but we spoke the same language. We sat initially with that. I mean, I really remember this, Rayna, in your apartment with gigantic file boxes of articles and running through them and making and fighting about them and writing that up. So it goes back to that, and our work has really evolved to a point where it's pretty hard for us to sometimes remember whose ideas was whose, but there are domains of things that we really like defer to each other on, that we know are going to be, but we can pretty much finish each other's sentences. And then we went on to do another one of these big international conferences much more recently in 2018 through the Wenner-Gren Foundation. And this one was called Disability Worlds. So the kind of between politics of reproduction and disability worlds is the terrain that we traveled over that time, and we see them as, you know, just evolving conversations, that because you can't, you know, in our view, you don't separate disability from reproduction because they're so completely tied in so many different ways. Reproduction very broadly conceived. So
I would only jump in to add one thing, which is the air that we breathe that also made it so easy for us to work together and maybe finish each other's sentences was also feminism. And we have not used that word so far in this conversation, but it was not an accident that Faye's project on looking at women, for her dissertation, looking at right-wing women and why they opposed abortion was of vital importance for American feminists to understand. And people on her committee and people in the larger world may not have gotten it. And she got a fair amount of hostility, as I recall, for like, oh, well, they're our enemy. But they're not our enemy. They're absolutely part of American culture. And for feminists, it was absolutely crucial that we make that transition and start to understand the diversity of gender, family, reproduction, working lives, and all the rest of it. So all those topics, which were part of the vitality of early women's studies and feminist theory, also, I think, leaven the ability for us to bring our different kinds of expertise and interests into the conversation.
I'm going to add a funny footnote because it just always kills me that when I finished, so I immediately, this is all for you young writers, right? I said, I will not, nothing stand in the way of me getting my book out, because I am really sure, you know, like anthropologists who go to Pago or whatever, it's like, oh, the world stands still, they can write it whenever they want. But I'm like, this is going to be like such, no one will even remember there was a fight over abortion back in the mid 1980s.
Ha ha ha.
So out came Contested Lives, my book, right? And then, you know, unfortunately, this is, you know, it has not gone away. It's had a very enduring legacy. So just a reminder, but it was really good to have the fire in my belly to get it out quickly, because literally in the case, in that study, even though it was very community-based, I worked in North Dakota, there was legislation coming out every second month about you know, further restricting abortion access, which is continuing to be the case now. But it's, so I don't know if you want us, we can go on and on. We love
to say something about that, that actually you both were still writing your own separate publications. And I think maybe Faye, if you can take that first and say you were also a scholar coming into the profession. You had all these obligations to write a book, to write articles peer-reviewed. So there are all these pressures on you. And how is writing with somebody else actually viewed from this one perspective, where you're supposed to write the great book or the peer-reviewed set of 7 articles?
Well, I turned that book around really fast. Also, my daughter was born with all these medical problems. So fortunately, the book was out before I ended up basically living for 2 years in the hospital with her. So in fact, she projectile vomited on the first copy of the book that arrived at my house before I realized what it was. Just giving you an idea of how reproduction interferes with writing. So we didn't think that we were going to start writing together. We had just become very good friends and very, you know, really good comrades in every way, through our feminism, through our activism, through our intellectual projects. And then through the different experiences we had with our kids. Rayna has also faced issues, much more milder issues of disability with one of her children, who's grown up now and doing beautifully. But so it really, as I think Rayna was kind of covering in her narrative, like it was toward the end, we did this Politics of Reproduction work together. And then in the early 2000s, we were invited to a big conference at the University of Chicago for a special issue of Public Culture that was going to be focused on disability politics, which it was. And we decided, okay, we're going to bite the bullet. We're going to write our first piece on this. It was much more of a kind of a thought piece. It didn't really have empirical grounding in the way that anthropologists think of doing empirical grounding, not that we didn't touch base with reality. And that kind of opened that door, and we started doing not just review essays together, which we've been doing, but actually starting to do this research together. And one thing we do want to say, because we never thought it's so strange, but literally our students in the past, in BC before COVID, would like hear us like laughing away and arguing in one of our offices, and they would like come in and kind of watch. They said, "Can we watch?" And we're like, "What do you want together?" It's like, do you write a paragraph and then you give it to Rayna, or does Rayna write what? And we don't. We literally just write everything completely together.
We want to hear how that actually works. We want to be the students walking into your office when you're there discussing and arguing and laughing. We want to be there and say, how does that actually work? Who's typing?
Faye is almost always typing, in part because she insists on having a technology I can't use. She's got a trackball that's set up for a right-handed person, and I'm left-handed. So sometimes I'm typing, but mostly Faye is typing, and mostly I'm yammering over her shoulder going, "No, no, no, that's not the right word," or "not a semicolon, a period, the sentence is too long." You would hear us and think we were a bunch of nattering, detail-oriented, but actually we're working at our ideas as we talk and write together. And it's just always been like that. And I've certainly had other writing collaborations which are more conventional, where, somebody will do this part of the article and somebody will do the middle and somebody else will do that. And then we'll switch them and co-edit. It's always been co-written right from the get-go, right from that very first article that Faye described. We just sat down, and it turned out to be very easy to literally start talking in a way that turned up on the page or then the computer screen as sentences.
So you just set a time and say, we're going to meet this afternoon and for 2 hours, and we're going to actually get on the computer and start writing.
As in, oh my God, we're late with a deadline for X. If we don't get it done on Friday, I'm going to have to slash my wrist. Can you meet me on Friday from 11 to 2:30 and we'll knock it out? And that's pretty much what we do.
And it helps also that we are extremely close friends. So, literally, I've done editing in the hospital room with my daughter or in the ICU. And then I throw things to Rayna to like take the next stage. And we have enormous trust in each other's intellect. And also there's only one person in the world I would trust to copy edit me, and that is Rayna, and vice versa.
And ditto. We edit each other's stuff, like when we do publish separately, which believe me, we still do, although both of us say we can't imagine how we write without one another. In fact, we went through our joint vita today to figure out how many articles we'd published, and this gobs of stuff we each do without the other person. But we usually send it through the other person. That is, I send a first draft of something to Faye because she's such a discriminating reader of the way I think. She understands how my bizarre mind works. So if I'm not making it clear to Faye, she knows how to tell me that. And I suspect vice versa. So
are there moments when you can use that trust, when you say not just don't use the semicolon, but say actually, how does that work? Because not everybody is going to have a writing partner they're also personal friends with, but you need to respect their judgment at that moment and trust they're trying to advance whatever you're trying to do.
Well, there's certain things that we know we have tendencies. So in the disability research, Rayna will remind me, because I'm kind of Pollyanna in hell, and Rayna will remind me that not everyone is an amazing activist. And we need to account for, we know each other's, what you say, our blessings and curses, it's good to pay attention to those activists, but my curses, I will, not notice, or I will not sufficiently acknowledge these other things. That's like, as an example, I'm always trusting that Rayna will remind me, like, we've got to, we have to be true to our data, for example. And
it can be door and very negative and sort of more pessimistic than Faye can, but every once in a while we switch roles.
Yeah.
So again, that's part of the trust. But I thought when you asked that question, Uli, that one of the nice things about the present moment for graduate students, and this has been going on, I don't know, certainly in our department for a very long time, but it wasn't the case when I was in graduate school, all those, in the Ice Age, is that people actually work in dissertation groups together. NYU has a lot of writing structure to try to help dissertators to actually learn how to share their work and write chapters and pass them around. It's kind of like a writing colony that gets structured among our dissertation writers. And that's really important. I think you learn your craft and you learn to have a thick skin, to not overprotect what you've done on a draft, but to assume that everything's going to have to be revised again and again and again. We're revising to the last minute it's out the door. And sometimes after it's published, we look at it and we go, oh, that sentence, oh, we meant to change it, when we see it. And that's part of the process of learning to write too. So while maybe not everybody's going to be blessed by having a best friend who is also your writing collaborator, I think these days that many, many people learn the craft of sharing their writing. And from there, the step toward collaboration and trust, it seems to me, is a little easier to make.
I want to pick up on collaboration and the word feminism you said earlier, because I think there is still in the academy a kind of mythology about the writer and writing in certain disciplines more than others, but that there's authorship and authority, and that there's a kind of training that doctoral students are trained to think, this is really what I believe, what I want to put on the page. And I think they're not as trained to be open. Someone saying, you could phrase this differently. You could be more clear here. I think there's also a training toward the sublime sentence or a book or a masterpiece or something, which is this kind of masculinist notion. And I sort of think when you're saying, let's try something else, Faye has trust, you're going to make it a better argument, and you're not arguing with Faye's choice of words, right?
Right.
Like, if you could say a little bit about that, because I think you're right, there's a more of a collaborative culture. I think there's still also the tendency, and the reward structure in the world is still sort of single author. There's a kind of built-in system, because if you're submitting a portfolio and everything is collaboration, some people will say, what is this? Did you do this yourself? Right? So can you say a little bit about this? How do you get to this place where you actually trust, you think this is going to be better and better for me?
Well, first, let me say something else, which your comment brought up, Uli, which is that if we were in the science model, it would be exactly the reverse. That is, everybody collaborates. There are multi-authored papers everywhere. There's an etiquette and a genre in which you know how to read the string of authors, who's the first, who's the last, who's in the middle, what does that mean about who collected the data, what does it mean about who did the analysis? We don't have that in the social sciences, the qualitative social sciences, and we certainly don't have that in the humanities either. So there are certainly the kinds of writing collaborations you're asking about, but I think they're much harder to nurture than in the sciences, where they have very little reflexivity built into the way they train, but they also think, it's very cool to be competitive with your team, and you should have a whole team. You shouldn't just be on your own. So I don't think that we see anthropology or many of the qualitative social sciences as team sports, but in some ways, of course they are. Their conversations were always building on the works of others.
Unfortunately, and yay for tenure. I mean, not everybody gets that privilege, but it definitely makes it easier. I don't remember ever thinking like, I was going to harm my career by working with you, Rayna. But, because we started writing before I had tenure, although most of it really happened afterwards. And the other thing that we wanted to talk about, if there's time, is that our collaboration is not limited to writing and doing research together, which has been really fun, but has also been about institution building and creating a space. So when you, I guess this is sort of like a feminist birthing project, just like to really go for the metaphors, like full tilt, which is if you start to invent something that's a bit new, you need to build a space for it in the academy, or it's not going to outlive you, or it won't have the kind of robust life that you want it to have. So the politics, when we wrote that Politics of Reproduction piece in 1992, it was a statement, it was a strategic intervention to say the politics of reproduction actually really matters in even in a field that, was not as masculinist as, let's say, economics or political science, but nonetheless had its tendencies. And that was very effective. There was actually just a conference held. I mean, we felt like we had become ancestors last summer.
Right, I forgot that one.
Amazing younger scholars, some like with tenure and whatever, and some much younger, who all worked in politics of reproduction. There were like 200 people on Zoom for this thing. And we realized we'd like totally, like, I don't know, what's the right
Was honoring the 25th anniversary of the edited book we had done. And we had no idea, we hadn't even noticed it was the 25th anniversary, but some younger, wonderful feminist scholars at Yale had noticed, and they called an international conference to celebrate it, right? To celebrate conceiving the New World Order. So we just went, as like Faye said, we were the ancestors. We got to pre-record a conversation, and then we got to be part of these workshops about how to transmit from the sort of senior generation to more junior, younger scholars. What would it take to get support for feminist work? How do you keep it moving? So I do think it's very feminist in that sense. And it wasn't our idea to do it at all, but people had taken a leaf from this particular playbook and moved with it in other directions.
But Rayna, false modesty. I mean, it wasn't our idea to have that event, which totally surprised us, but it was definitely our intention back in 1990.
We're very strategic about, okay, we have to transform the field. And we did the same thing with disability studies. We realized both of us by then had tenure and something of a reputation, and we were secure. And we thought, okay, there have been people laboring in this field, scholars who usually themselves, but not only, but usually have disabilities, who've been talking about an anthropology of disability. And they're so marginalized by the professional organizations. We have to use the forums we have and make them more central. And so we just made some allyship with lots of other people and started putting on meetings at sessions. And those were interventions. Those were strategic interventions meant to say to the world, look, there are a lot of people out here. You just may come because you know who we are, but stay and listen to this very complex, extremely creative new perspective that is being birthed, to use Faye's metaphor again.
And there's a secret club, because the head of the incoming head of the Wenner-Gren Foundation, and this would have been 2016, called us up because she had heard we were thinking of trying to do the Wenner-Gren Foundation for Anthropologists is a major source of all research and writing funding. And they also run 2 major international conferences. They're week-long events. They're amazing every year to help fertilize the field, so to speak, with new directions. And she called us up and said, oh, we heard you were interested in running one of these conferences on disability. We said, oh yeah, but we're not ready. She said, send us something. And it turned out that she, in fact, is a parent of a child with pretty substantive disabilities. So there's a club out there. So it was very interesting that got activated through another kind of network of people who have been wanting to put this kind, similar like reproduction, which was always marginalized. And now it's like, okay, this is, needless to say, disability studies was out there. They're amazing scholars, but in our own field of anthropology, we felt the discipline needed a really big push. And so this international conference, which got funded by this foundation, helped provide that push and get a lot more visibility. And the other thing, though, just to kind of build on that, is the opportunity to build here at NYU. So we were just trying to remember what date. In 2007, we got one of those provostial grants. It was the only one that was inaugurated. This is in the old days under John Sexton. That was inaugurated by faculty across
from the bottom up rather than the top down.
It was, Tisch School of the Arts. It was people who ended up in the engineering school, whatever. And we started this. I have to remember the correct name because it was a name, the NYU Council for the Study of Disability. And we all got to be very friendly, just finding each other, locating courses. And then we ran events every year. And by 2016, we were able to start a disability studies minor. And then in 2017, we got more substantial provostial funding and some grants, and we started the Center for Disability Studies. And that has enabled us to really make much more of a presence for this work here on campus and have some institutional weight to it. So that has been birthed from our writing as well. And that's been really exciting because we can bring so many great people here.
It sounds like you got more done and you got energized by one another to actually sort of, and to also even think to, because as Faye said, or I don't know, maybe Rayna said it, if you want to shift a paradigm or shift something, you have to create the space for it, for other people to even understand what you're doing. If you're a lone voice, you can also be more readily dismissed, which happens to lots of great people who really don't find the community. So did you think that writing together made you in a way, the words maybe it's too corporate, accountable or more productive, to say, look, on Friday, I have to spend 2 hours writing, because you can't, because if the other person shows up, you're just going to do it. You're not going to say, oh, I'm not inspired. I have to read 5 more read 5 more articles right now.
Absolutely. I mean, you're right. We are very accountable to one another, and we do take our deadlines seriously, even if they make us crazy anxious from time to time. But I guess I also want to say something that Faye alluded to before, which is that just like there was a lot of activism around reproduction that led us to write that first annual review piece, there was a lot of activism and advocacy and really excellent emergent and then quite institutionalized scholarship in disability studies. And for us, the puzzle was why anthropology wasn't paying more attention. So we had a job to do to bring the work of other people who had already taken that lead, who had already made themselves accountable to a much larger community. Much of it was in the humanities. A lot of it started out in literature and in the arts. And what's ironic was that there wasn't that much social science in the beginning. And we kept sort of nudging each other and saying, we need to put the social science, the qualitative social sciences, the life histories, the lived experiences, the kinship charts, the actual institution building, all those kinds of things that an anthropologist would do. We need to make anthropologists see that this is going on everywhere, or at least many places that we have been oblivious to. So accountability, yes, to one another, but to a much larger set of advocate scholars in the world that we felt we also had to amplify.
Did you think quite concretely in this longer process where to place publications? You mentioned those big conferences, to actually say, we want to address a field, and naively, maybe it seems too obvious now. Why was the field not even receptive in the early 90s to what you were saying? What was the resistance? Was it just we're not used to think this way? Or what do you think was the motivation, or the lack of motivation to hear what you were saying?
Well, we rarely go psychoanalytic, but we kind of will in this one, because we think.
Okay, we're ready. Okay.
Lie down on the couch. So we think there is a kind of, there's a lot of anxiety about the issues that disability brings up, because people are pretty, unless you kind of go down that road for experientially in one way or another, people are fundamentally very ableist. They really, and there's a kind of long tradition of the, that Susan Sontag wrote about, of the anthropologist as hero, and, out with, crossing the highlands of Papua New Guinea or whatever. And of course, there were amazing, anthropologists who've been blind, who've been, we've had all kinds of things going on, but we think it got marginalized because the forms of difference that got valorized in the field were different, were other kinds of difference. And of course, disability is the most universally present form of human difference. And so we have been making that, we are a 4-field discipline, that wants to acknowledge, our primate ancestry and archaeology and linguistics and all of that. But in any case, we have tried to make this point over and over again. And I think it's also the work of the younger scholars. And I feel like, I don't know that we've inspired them so much as helped keep the door open. Mm-hmm. And for people ahead of us to remind people that we had amazing ancestors who set the ground, laid the foundations that were not always appreciated. And so we, in a way, that's a very kind of feminist project to say, rather than to like march in and say, we're the really smartest ones and blah, 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 which of course you can't do in disability studies anyway, because it's just like so wrong. But we're very excited to see all the amazing work coming along behind us. And also, we've been teaching together. We've been co-teaching a course on disability called Disability Worlds for their undergrad minor, which we have so much fun teaching. The students are so phenomenal.
Fabulous. The students are fabulous.
And their opportunity to actually disclose and learn about, so look, everybody's got something, and it's amazing. When you do 2 weeks on MAD studies, right? This generation of students, it was really fascinating just how many times people just came out and never thought about even thinking analytically or politically about their own experiences with whatever you want to say, depression,
mental health challenges in one form or another. People are just out there in a way that certainly in my generation, nobody ever was. Nobody would have talked about that. And if you had disclosed, people would have delegitimized your scholarship on that basis. You would have become an unreliable scholar. And I think that's part of what Faye was alluding to when she says we don't usually go psychoanalytic, but we feel like there is such a kind of an ableist taboo against disability on so many levels, one of which is there, but for fortune could have gone I, and facing your own aging, speaking as the gray hair in this club, if we all live long enough, if we're all lucky to live long enough, we will all have some sort of a disability, a hearing or a vision impairment, a mobility impairment. Some of us will be losing parts of our mind. I mean, it's in the newspaper, it's in your novels, it's in your media, it's in your, your memoirs and your blog posts all the time, and yet people don't want to face it. So I think that's one of it. And the other part, I guess I would just add, alluding back to what Faye said about the psychoanalytic, is that the mind-body split, which goes way, way deep, depending on whether you want to be a Cartesian or a Greco-Roman scholar on this one, that I think the fear of cognitive loss for academics is beyond discussion. There is so much anxiety because if you make your mind by believing your brain is your main tool of creativity and productivity, the idea that people think differently or think more slowly or think transversely, or maybe don't have verbal language, maybe they think in language but don't speak. I mean, all those things become a kind of a threatening scenario that people just cannot easily face if they have clawed their way into the academy by the hard work of their brains. The idea that the brain itself is up to negotiation and variable and will come and go throughout your life course, and you might be one traumatic accident away from having to rethink it, or COVID may leave you in a state of whatever, the equivalent of chronic fatigue. None of those things are speakable to many, many people, specifically in the profession, and especially in academia.
So I want to address one of the first questions that came up in chat. And Uli, you know that we are very old friends, and I love you and respect you. And I am remiss because now whenever I do public speaking, particularly at NYU, I insist that we get CART support, and we always have publicity goes out that asks if people need ASL. And I have to tell you the truth, this totally fell off my brain that this event was coming up because it's been so busy. And I usually—
and we've talked about it, so we apologize. So I just spoke with Kyla in the chat. So we really apologize, and we want to be sure that the recording will absolutely be fully accessible. So we apologize for that. And Faye, we've talked about this. So we really take the responsibility. It's not on you as a panelist to remind us of this. So we failed on this. We apologize to the people in the chat as well, but the recording will absolutely be accessible.
I totally accept that burden. And I know that we have had that chat about a forthcoming event actually next week with the fabulous, amazing dancer, Alice Shepard, the choreographer, wheelchair dancer, and activist. Anyway, and so in co-sponsoring that event, we said, please don't forget to put on that event. Please let us know if you need anything. And we always do this with Center for Disability. We ask for CART, caption access in real time, so that we have a live transcription happening for people, because there also are often people who are hard of hearing who, thank you for anonymous chat person who brought that up. It's really important. Who may not know at ASL, they're losing their hearing. They've never mastered that language. So we just try and do that as a matter of course. And I want to say a little publicity, which is you cannot study something like disability and not be activist about it. But, so having the Center for Disability Studies, we have a guide for anyone who's interested on our website at the NYU Center for Disability Studies that says, here, are you going to organize an event? Do you want to be sure it's accessible to people who may need support for hearing or who have limited vision, or a whole, of course, when they're live, we always have wheelchair access and, a variety of things. And we have here's like a one pager. You can do this. It's not that hard. Here's who you call. Your tax dollars at work. It costs nothing to ask for part support if you can demonstrate that you may have people in your audience who will need that. And there are always people in the audience who need that. So, people worked really, really, really hard to pass the ADA in 1990, 30 years ago. And that's what's available, but it's so off our brains, and here we'll go psychoanalytic again, that, mostly, so I'm doing this to everyone with whom I do a public event.
Right.
And I just had a big conversation with the Kevorkian people, and
So we'll totally hear you. So again, we offer our apology. We'll make it available for the recording, which is not sufficient, because as you said, we do not want to exclude anybody in the audience right now or for the recording. There's a question here, I don't know if you can see this in the chat, when thinking about neurodiversity and whether people, there's collaboration challenges for people with different kind of abilities, whether you can think about or address that people actually want to work together. And the question is, I've been thinking about neurodiversity a lot lately and how the lack of acceptance of it is actually an obstacle for collaboration between different kinds of learners or writers. Could you say something about that?
Thank you, Skylar. We know Skylar. Well, that's interesting because there's also a lot of collaboration among folks who identify as neurodiverse. So I'm not 100% sure. Maybe you interpret that differently, Rayna. I think that's also a huge issue just for teaching and making your classrooms more accessible and pacing one's teaching and so forth. I don't know, Rayna, do you have a different response to that? I think it's highly specific to different kinds of circumstances, and it really has to do with figuring out, well, okay, how's this communication going to happen together? And there's so many ways. I mean, really, we have learned with COVID, there are just so many different ways and technologies, for the most part, our friend in this regard. Rayna, sorry, I don't mean to.
No, that's fine. I would only add to what you said to piggyback. One of the first things you could do is ask people themselves what it would require to be able to collaborate. I'm just thinking that we have had a lot of speakers who come at the Center for Disability Studies who come from neurodiverse positions, and we always ask, what is the way to set up this event? You're the expert. Let us know what we can do to make this a possibly welcoming environment in which you can do your best work, and so can we. So that those collaborations, again, start in practice, and then some of them, I think, become writerly as well. I mean, I'm thinking of some of the co-edited books among people who themselves identify as neurodiverse, All the Weight of Our Dreams or Loud Hands Project, but those are all collaborations in which people coming from a kind of neurodiversity, pro-neurodiversity perspective have learned to either write or edit together, sometimes setting up other kinds of projects together. We have a lot to learn as allies in some senses of those kind of experiments and how to make sure your voice gets amplified.
And if I can just be shamelessly promoting the Center for Disability Studies and speaking
Thursday. And
Skylar's excellent question. In fact, a lot of what we learned about making neurodiverse, making learning more available for a much wider array of body minds. We learned from an awesome autistic self-advocate, scholar, kick-ass legal activist, etc. Lydia X.Z. Brown, who will be in conversation with Michael John Carley. They're both autistic self-advocates tomorrow at 5 p.m. I'm going to throw a link in the chat for everybody to go, and you will learn so much from them. I know our first year teaching. It was our first year running the Center for Disability Studies. We invited Lydia X.Z. Brown, who co-authored, speaking of co-authorship, an amazing collection, All the Weight of Our Dreams, which also insisted that autism is not exclusively white and male. It's brilliant. I mean, and just experiencing an event with Lydia teaches you so much, starting with telling everyone, I don't mind if you move around, if you speak, if you have to get up and stretch, if you have to leave, you know, just recognizing that for some people sitting for the length of an academic talk is not a comfortable thing necessarily. So yeah, so anyways, thanks for motivating that, Skylar.
I put that in the chat, the link to the events page that's tomorrow. So people can copy that. To go to something related, you've worked also with other people in co-writing. How do you actually navigate the fact that they also like events and they're people with different rhythms, et cetera, depending on how they're classified. But somebody, when you want to work with somebody, and let's say there's a great discrepancy in seniority or actually someone is incredibly timely, and I have friends, I'm sure I'm guilty of it too, of not responding all the time and missing all sorts of deadlines. That's part of, unfortunately, what we do. How do you actually navigate that? If you're close friends, you can call, you say, Rayna, hey, you're supposed to be here, it's 3 o'clock on Friday. If in the Zoom world right now, someone says I can't do it or I didn't get to it, and there may also be other reasons. There may be insecurity, or there may be some way I am not quite ready, or you wrote 4 paragraphs and I have the sentence. How do you think collaboration continues and doesn't get stuck at that moment and kind of fall apart? And I'm sure you have that as well. I've actually had one collaborative project that did not work out, and I was a junior scholar, and it was incredibly unsettling for me. It took me a long time to work out why it didn't work. And I felt I put so much work into it, and it didn't work out. And then it went kind of nowhere. So how do you keep it going when it gets more difficult? And you're close friends, that's easier. But when you're not close friends, when you're just working together, you've done big conferences, so lots of people you've dealt with who probably don't respond always on time.
There's always somebody who's the most, least likely to respond and who makes you crazy as an editor trying to get the paper that they brought to a conference late into a publication they're going to be late on to. That said, I had one, I guess I do want to say failed collaboration like you're describing, Uli. We were on a big funded research project together. We did great research, but writing, and we were a team. I mean, we were like 3 senior anthropologists with a bunch of graduate students and even some undergraduates that we were able to hire. And the research was fabulous, but we never managed to get very many publications out of it. I mean, we had a whole plan that could have even been a book, but none of that happened. Very few publications came out of it. And those things are painful because I certainly wanted to preserve the friendships and the colleagueships and the respect for the kind of ideas and the field work that we had done, the practices we had done together. But I had to let go of the desire to make the publications work. It just didn't work. We got a couple of things out. They were all so painful. They felt like you had to be almost violent with people you wanted to be kind to in order to get them to do their piece of the work, blah, blah, blah. We stopped doing it. So I don't think, again, I think Faye and I are particularly lucky in a way that I know of only 1 or 2 other kind of working friendships that, have long-term staying power where people just feel like they've had a brain transplant together. In fact, we often refer to ourselves as 2 tushies with but 1 brain, right? Because we can no longer figure out when we sit down, Faye's at the keyboard, I'm next to her, and our mind is kind of working together. But I don't think many people are as lucky as we are to have that just work out over decades and decades. So I think there will be failures and there will be partial successes. I've certainly written with a lot of other people quite successfully, but that's probably 1 article or 2 or something. It's not a lifelong collaboration in the way this has willy-nilly evolved into being.
And we have to say, we're just like super lucky, but we didn't actually, it didn't even occur to us. I mean, we knew not everybody had this, but like until we started having
About it.
this weird thing where like students were standing at our office door, like we were like rare primates, and you know, trying to figure out what we were doing, and we're like, oh, it doesn't, you know, and we realized a lot of people talk to us about their collaborations and said they tend to like, I'll write this section here and you write this section here, and they divide it up in a really different way, and which is a totally, and I've written that way of it. I've written with my husband, Fred Myers, and we tend to write more like that. Like I'll take this section, you'll take this section, our expertise is different. But I mean, part of our joy is you know, kind of working through the ideas and coming up with like interesting, you know, we have our favorite little phrases. Like the one that we most are attached to that nobody likes besides us is called the doubled telos of modernity. So, you know, but it becomes very affectionately attached to that because it represents working through some really complicated contradictory ideas that we were trying to figure out how they mapped together in our work. So, you know, things like that. But
yeah, I think I was just thinking when you were speaking, I think I've co-edited 3 books, all of them with friends, because I like to shift the friendship to this collaborative model. And one of them, probably the very rewarding, probably stretches our friendship because I'm the one typing, because I'm usually faster. So I type, I have a sentence, and then my friend goes, yeah. And he kind of completely corrects the essence of the sentence with a word. And then my other friend, Emily, she's like, well, and then basically I write some dumb sentence and they kind of make it better. And they just say, well, Uli, that's not quite, and then sort of every sentence gets better, but I never feel it's a mind melt. I kind of just feel I'm sort of the secretary doing this and it's great, and they kind of give me this incentive, but I trust them that it'll be better afterwards. And you have arrived at a point where you sort of, you know, this trust. If you could speak to people a little bit about getting things out, do you ever had discussions or sort of you needed to do something like you want to move in different professional circles or something, or you just because you're in the same field, you always agreed we want to publish this article here or do this conference there or do this review?
Well, one thing that happens is that each of us often gets invited to other conferences. That is, Faye's will be far more in the realm of media and mediated culture. Mine will be far more in the realm of public health or politics of health. We will sometimes say to the conference organizers, do you have the funds to bring along my partner? Because we think about this topic together. And so we've done that, and we've gone to one another's conferences any number of times. But there are also times when each of us just goes off and does our own thing, as you started to indicate earlier, with a tremendous trust that the other person in a certain way is already present in whatever we're gonna present, because our thinking has been so, you know, Faye may be only working on Indigenous media, seems very far from anything I would have anything to contribute. But in some senses, once you hit the disability part of it or the gendered and reproduction part of it, there's no way to separate out the conversations we've been having over decades. So I think we just influence each other, whether we're working literally together or we're off on our own.
so you asked us if there are any deficits. And I would say the only deficit I can think of is, this was in a set of questions you gave us to think about prior to this. We have so much fun working together, and also our lives are very intertwined. We know huge amounts about each other's children and aging parents, and when that was relevant, and other things. So it slows us down in terms of like productivity. Like we will sometimes say, let's put these 2 hours aside and we'll write like 1 page because we got very tied up in a medical issue I'm having, or I run the foundation for my daughter's disease, and like, how do I negotiate with the doctors about X, Y, or Z? And, you know, Rayna has great medical advice. And so, I don't call it a problem, but it's a different pacing, and you just have to embrace that, because that's part of the joy of the writing, is that we are so deeply connected, and the trust is built on that level of knowledge of each other's worlds, and those worlds float into the writing in all sorts of ways.
It sounds so good. If you think about your teaching, and I would love to take a class with you because it's just, I mean, for me, everything about this is totally fascinating. If you think about the assignments you give your students, because I teach a lot of students at NYU who are not majors in my discipline, which is literature and photography, they're just general students. And they're all pretty much expected to write on their own, to not collaborate with anybody. I do a lot of teamwork, but when it comes to something that's graded, it's single author. So in a weird way, we are teaching them the model that you are actually saying, this is a great working model. We actually, at least in my classes, I do so much teamwork, but there's graded work that's an essay or an exam or whatever it is. And that seems to be actually maybe not so clever, because why don't I let two of them work together and grade their joint project? I do grade the joint. But can you say something about whether you've been able to translate it and on the undergraduate and graduate levels, which are different?
I don't think we have been able to translate it that way. That's very interesting what you said. And again, if we were in the sciences, that would be a given. You know, the whole lab team sinks or swims on the basis of what they do. They may be very angry at one member who's not pulling their weight, but you know, it's still a team project. We don't do that. Although what we have observed, I mean, we were talking about this today when we're teaching our undergraduate class, they have really become a community. They are so supportive of one another. They give one another props all the time. They're always sending feedback on ideas. They're in the part of the course where they're starting to present their own research. And they are so both focused in on what the next person is doing and so able to comment on it using the vocabulary that they've basically forged with our mentorship over the course of whatever, 14 weeks. So it's not what you've said. And I do think what you said is right. That is, it would be great to design collaborative exercises. And I know that Anne Rodemaker does that. She runs a lab in ecological anthropology. She's got people out doing collaborative work on, you know, urban ecology all the time. And again, the physical anthropologists in our department, the biological anthropologists, they do that all the time. I don't think we've kind of ascended to that level at all, but it's a wonderful suggestion.
So I'm going to exempt myself slightly from that. I mean, first of all, I will say, yes, our undergrad class has been amazing. So they have to present what their final project is going to be for 5 minutes, and then they have 5 minutes for comments. We don't need to say anything. They are just, it's like Paulo Freire came and told them to all talk to each other. It's so great. However, I also run the graduate certificate program in culture and media, and our students in the capstone, these are PhD students for the most part in cinema studies, anthropology, comp lit, and now it looks like XE. We're going to be having master students coming in and working with us. They make a film, they make a documentary film, and they all work on each other's films. It's a very small, like we never have more than 10. So like you need someone to do sound with you. They all comment on each other's editing. The nature of certain kinds of creative work is, you know, inherently collaborative. You can't make a film by yourself. I mean, you can, but it's very difficult. But you really, I mean, just for the sheer sake of like toting your gear, etc. But also, you always need, you know, comments and other eyes or ears on your project. So I think that, you know, there are different ways that we do this. I mean, I know I'm often putting graduate students together to think about things. You know, I think it's a tough model. You know, also we have, as part of the network of the NYU Center for Disability Studies, we have an amazing inter-school group called the Ability Project, which is Tandon Steinhardt, that is occupational therapists, engineers, and Tisch folks. And they invent stuff together to help different, basically clients that they work with who have particular issues that they're trying to solve. And it's about, that's got to be collaborative and teamwork. So you can't, you know, yes, the humanities and qualitative social sciences do have that tradition, and it's hard to, you know, it's hard to get rid of.
Why I'm raising it, I think it's kind of at the heart of this conversation, but it's a much bigger issue that the humanities, I think, still are modeled on a single author, creative genius type. That's a cynical way of putting it, or actually saying, form your own voice, find your voice, hone your writing, whatever. It could be positive or negative. But I think it actually is to the detriment of the humanities. And I give you, I'm not an anthropologist, as you will see right now. I'll give you one example and try to extrapolate some general meaning from it. So there's no study. So my son studies astrophysics in college. And I've asked him, and he had to take the mandatory humanities courses in literature. He made not one friend in literature courses because he never saw those kids outside of class, and he only saw them once a week for 3 hours, and they discussed big topics. But he made friends with all of his fellow students in physics and math and data science because he couldn't do the homework by himself. He had to meet with other kids and be in a group. And in the English class, where we think we do critical thinking and all this stuff, he was never assigned anything. He wrote an essay by himself about Frankenstein or the Eyes Were Watching God, and he submitted that essay and got comments back, and there was not much else except the class discussion. So the whole humanities model privileges a certain kind of isolation, to put it negatively, or fostering one's own voice. But I think this is actually a problem. And I think what you're saying, you can get graduate students to work together, but the dissertation in the humanities is still very much a single author project. Really, I mean, I've never seen a dissertation written by more than one person. So the collaborative writing you're describing is actually an advantage. But the disciplines in the humanities, especially in the qualitative social sciences, have been set up to privilege single author and even single author publication. I mean, you both know this, the tenure files that you review from all over the country and the world, the single author essays and the single author book, especially in the humanities, that is the standard. So I think what we're trying to see is actually you as an example. You've been able to be really impactful, creative in collaboration. But the way the humanities are set up, and not every class, not every discipline, not every department, not every university, but I think largely is still very much focused on individual work. I mean, that's my impression. I don't know, but probably it's on me to change it for myself.
But you know, more things happen in the classroom than just that work. So, I mean, we have like four or five theater students in our class, all with disabilities, all amazing. And they are like leading an uprising in Tisch this Friday to, I mean, in a good way, to say, why is disability not incorporated into drama? You know, when there are all these amazing, you know, Ali Stroker, an NYU grad, is out there, you know, winning, you know, major awards for her work as an incredible actor, and also, you know, a wheelchair user, right? And anyway, so, you know, we're excited to see, yeah, and they're all like sending notes to each other like, oh, wow, you're doing the history of Willowbrook. I'd love to do a dramatic, you know, rendition of the voices that you're gathering in oral histories. And, you know, so they're finding all kinds of ways to collaborate. It's all happening in the chat box. I like, you know, silver lining, okay, Pollyanna and Hell Speaks, silver lining of COVID is the chat box in classes. I've just never seen anything like it. And maybe it's been going on the whole time, but the students, like their level of, Rayna already said this, so, you know, proving that we are two tushies with one brain. It's just remarkable. They're, you know, so lovely and so wanting to be, you know, they form a community in the chat box. It's amazing. So, you know, I don't know. I think, you know, I'm sure that your son's experience in that class is probably fairly typical, but I do think there are a lot of, I mean, so it's interesting. The chat box is on the margin. It's not supposed to be the central thing. It actually, all this action is happening there. And it's amazing. And we see, I think the kind of disability class that we run really lends itself to that. And also, I think we model collaboration in our teaching because we used to start like laughing at each other and finishing each other's sentences and whatever. But I think it gives them the feeling like that's okay. But I have a feeling that would happen no matter what.
So maybe I'm going to take Faye's role and be Pollyanna in hell. But Uli, perhaps even just bringing this up in humanities classes and saying to people, what would it take to both really hone your own writing, but also really to collaborate on the fact that we are a community of readers and writers together. To open that conversation would in and of itself be the chat box in a certain way. And I think there are many, many openings that we can all be part of. And to go back to something you said right in the beginning, I think that's a more feminist, less kind of individualist, striving, read masculinist or anything else you want into it. But I think that to make those spaces of collaboration, to ask people to think about it, is in and of itself part of the work of what we're talking about.
I mean, I think it's feminist. That's how I learned it in a way. I think it's this hyper individualism of scholarship is not good. And I think it's, first of all, not genuine, because then everybody suddenly realizes after your dissertation, you submit your first book manuscript, and then it gets edited. And you think, wait, I never learned this part, because I didn't learn that anybody edits anything in graduate school. I got comments on papers if I was lucky. I had the most amazing teachers. They did sometimes respond, not always. So I think this kind of model of individualism is really to the detriment of your own growth. And it's, whether feminist or not, I actually think that to work with somebody, and even if you find a relationship to say, what if there's an advanced student who you can give a paper to, and they are mentors in your class or tutors or some such thing, and they say, like, actually, no, you're going to get this edited. The first round is never finished. You're going to get one round of edits. And that's, for a lot of my students, they think I wrote the paper, it's 5 pages, I can submit it now. And the fact that they want to respond to comments is really, it's a learning experience, and you're sort of embodying that. But I think you're right, Rayna, to bring it up for humanities teaching, which some of it is very conventional, some of it is very advanced, of course. Skylar's having a couple of questions. Faye, you got the question. Do you want to just repeat the question for the people in the audience?
Thank you, Skylar, for being so engaged. This is part of what I meant. I meant people who don't identify as neurodiverse and assume a sort of individual genius. And I think, forgive us for gender stereotyping, but we see this as a masculinist paradigm, or I think Rayna and I do. And I think Uli agrees with us. So I have an article title for one of us to write, or maybe we'll do it collaboratively, which it'll be called Move Over Paulo Freire, or Join Paulo Freire. The chat box is Alternative Pedagogy.
I think the chat box as Alternative Pedagogy could join that wonderful article that Mara and I can see her, Rebecca and Michelle wrote about, you know.
Rayna and Faye, do us a favor. So tell us, Paulo Freire, and what is alternative pedagogy? What do you mean by that? That the chat is actually something that you want to have happen?
Well, I think what we have seen happening, pardon me, Rayna, I'm so sorry, I see you leaning in.
No, just tell them tell the audience about Paulo Freire.
Right.
Oh my goodness, a very famous educational
Brazilian radical thinker, teacher, pedagogue, insisted that the banking model of education, in which you feed the investment into the student one mouthful at a time, one paper at a time. No. This was a collaborative community event, and that people actually had expertise and knowledge. And the point was to get them, because he was dealing with working class Brazilians, to actually be able to articulate something about their own expertise. So that's at the beginning of it. It doesn't mean there's no room for the teacher or for expertise that can be exchanged, but the assumption that people are in some senses tabula rasa and can be just given what it is you have. It's your investment and it's your genius that will feed them and educate them. That's really at the heart of the critique of his model. And Faye just put in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is Freire's most famous book in English, translated into English.
Tell me how this idea, how has it informed your practice as teachers? What part of it do you think has been productive? And I think it's really important for people, because I think what we're trying to do is to open this conversation. Some people will be intimately familiar, and some people this will be their first time. What part of this actually works for you in your classroom?
Well, this is the first time we're actually having this conversation, so it's kind of like
we like that.
But it's kind of like we went backwards through the revolving door and ended up in the building, and now we can tell you the name on the building. We are, I don't know, I think it's just imagining that students can discover these things. They don't need to be spoon-fed, to use the kind of Freirean analogies, or bank or deposited in, but they can teach each other, and they bring a whole range of life experiences and skills. And of course, that's also the gift of more increasingly diverse classrooms.
And also that's an Anthropology 101 lesson. Everybody comes from somewhere, and that somewhere has resources, not only deficits. So in something like medical anthropology, this is so conventional, it's not radical at all. But one of the early exercises I asked the undergraduates at NYU, about half of whom are either global public health or pre-med students, to go find somebody and take an illness narrative, that is, get their perspective on a health challenge they have experienced. And almost inevitably, it's somebody in their family. And almost inevitably, they talk to a mother or a grandfather or a sibling or the best friend of their father, and they learn about the depth of the knowledge people carry inside themselves, and that can be unlocked if you can slow down and structure some questions that don't assume you have any judgment or knowledge about what they're going to tell you. So again, it's Anthro 101, but it is a way of saying there is knowledge out there. It's not just what we and our books can give you. It's what you can learn to work through with other people.
Well, Rayna, it's Anthro 101, but why we really appreciate having you here is because I'm having this conversation with Tao Lee Goff, who's now professor at Cornell, who was at NYU a couple of years ago. And we had this conversation this afternoon on Twitter, which says, why do so many contemporary writers insist they don't have an identity because they want to be seen only for the work? And I said, well, because for so many writers, it was to their detriment that they had a social identity. They were excluded from all sorts of things. And for other writers, now it's a fantasy to have come as a blank slate. So that's why we want this kind of Anthro 101. What does it shift about assuming that everybody brings something, both a resource and a deficit, that there's actually something that everybody brings something and not some people are neutral, objective, and other people do? So I think that is actually at the heart of collaboration, that you both know you're going to bring something each time. It's also not going to be the same thing every time. You're not static human beings. I'm sure over since you were 10, you've been working together. So you went through lessons together and you're really adulthood.
I just want to give you some examples from our class today because it was just mind blowing. So we had a lovely young student, a young woman of color who's writing about Black Disabled Lives Matter, which is a subset of Black Lives Matter that has been, was emergent this summer and very active. It's actually been around for a while. And so we covered that. We did some really great reading and had some activist talk. And, and she's now for the very first time interviewing elder male figures in her family who she now realizes were disabled by their encounters with police, right? And the class gives her the kind of courage and validity. It's like you're going to help me finish my college course if you let me talk to you about something that's been really
very painful topic that you don't usually talk about at all, that's been taboo in our family, but you could help me get through my college course if you could have a conversation with me about it.
And then another student came out as trans and talked about the theater piece that they're going to do. I mean, it's just like that space gave, and then bam, in the chat box, so much stuff. Read this. No, how about that? And do you know that, and from very different cultural backgrounds, like really different cultural backgrounds. The class is itself, there's another like young Nicaraguan guy who discovered the amazing history of Nicaraguan Sign Language. And like taught the class about it today. So it's very, I don't know, I just find it extremely moving to see that. We just like sat back and said, 5 minutes, everybody comment next,
Okay, here it is. And maybe we need to announce it right here in this webinar. We need to write a collaborative article with the whole class called It's Happening in the Chat Box.
Yes.
Everybody should weigh in on it because everybody.
I actually think, Rayna, I think you should absolutely do it, and then you should do it also with some kind of things to implement, because I think a lot of students and teachers are kind of defeated by the medium. And I think to sort of to revalorize it and say, this is actually something you can utilize and it becomes an asset. Because I think, you see this in your own students, you see it in your own lives, I see it in my kids. there's fatigue and all that, and there's a kind of tedium but the chat box, if that becomes a space where also the people who are not leaning in so much, not so extroverted, can suddenly feel, wow, I have a voice here and people will pay attention. That is, I think, it would be really worthwhile.
And it's another part of democratization in that, at least speaking as an oldster doofus, I'm not good with this technology. Faye's way, way better. She takes care of that part of the course almost always. But the young ones really know their technology. They can get a reference up. They can deal with anything in 5 minutes. So it's another place where we could pay attention to collaborative skills and expertise that people bring from their different experiences. They may be new to this topic in the course, but they're not new to being able to operate in the chat box.
When before we close, because we have a kind of, we told people that it's still about 7:30 in this time zone right now, because some people may be on and it's not 7:30. So before we close, anything you want to impart advice to give to people who are setting out on a writing career, whether it's for academia or other things, like in terms of you found your writing partners, you met other writing partners, in terms of the collaborative dimension of it, how much of your writing is collaborative, how much is still single author? And what do you want to say to people who are listening, who are writers? We have a lot of people in the audience usually who are writers themselves.
I'm going to sound like Marie Kondo.
That's okay.
Get rid of the shit that does not give you joy. We are so privileged to be in a field where there is so much deadening, terrible, difficult labor that so many people do because there are no choices. We are so privileged to have choices, to be able to sit and think about these incredible things every day, and to, we learn so much from our students. I mean, I'll just use the disability class one more time as we close to say, we are so aware. Our students were all born however many years after, let's see, like at least 10 years after the ADA was passed. They went to schools, they have family members, they themselves were educated because that law was passed, and they're like a completely different generation. It's like, they give us hope for the future because their attitudes, I mean, it took us a really long time. I mean, my daughter was born and it was like, I had barely met anyone with a disability. There were no disabled kids in my school. I knew nothing. I was privileged with health. I had no idea. These kids are like, they're brought up with it. They're teaching us, and they are also, and it's like, what can we do? We can communicate that there is value in their experience and that there is joy in learning this. That's all I got to say.
I think I'll let Faye have the last word. That was lovely.
I never thought I would ever quote Marie Kondo in a conversation.
And Paulo Freire in the same Zoom.
That's right. Between Paulo Freire, the pedagogy of the oppressed, and if it doesn't spark joy, let it go.
Right, exactly.
You have to thank it and let it go. Okay,
right, exactly.
So we want to thank you, Faye Ginsburg and Rayna Rapp, professors of anthropology at New York University, the co-directors of the Center for Disability Studies, and you're working together on a forthcoming book, the title of which is yet unknown, but it was at one point Disability, Personhood, and the New Normal in 21st Century America. So we really want to thank you for joining us and making this into a much more moving conversation than just some technical tips for co-writing. So I really want to thank you for spending time with us today.
Thanks for the invitation. Stay safe and stay well, everybody.